So welcome everyone to this State of Agile Culture panel discussion in partnership with the Agile Business Consortium, Truthsayers and JCURV. Really fantastic to have you here. My name's Jain and I'm going to be your host for the evening over the next hour. Thank you so much for joining and finding the time to, share your insights and reflections from what you've read in the findings of this survey. So hopefully, please use the chat functionality, share your reflections, but also ask our panelists some questions as well. And we've got some time at the end to make sure we cover as many of those as we possibly can. So I'm joined today by some fantastic panelists. So I'm going to do a quick round the table to see who we have and where they've come from. So Phil, do you want to start?
Sure, thanks, Paul. So I'm Phil Pringle. I'm the CTO of Provident Group and Vanquis Bank in the UK. I've been lucky enough to have a varied number of roles in both technology and commercially across 20 or 30 years in financial services.
Right, I'll pick up from there. So hi everybody, I'm Nikki. I, until earlier this year, was the Chief Data Officer at Direct Line Group, the insurance business, where I led a data transformation. And we actually worked with JCURV there to bring an agile set of principles and practices to help make that change happen. And before that, I worked for 18 years at dunnhumby, a data and analytics business who work with retailers and brands. And often they're out of a sort of mindset more than I think practice and principles. We worked in an agile way, having sort of an entrepreneurial spirit, but not always much structure. So yeah, that's me. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Nikki. I'll go next. So I'm Perry. I'm an HR and OD consultant by trade now, but I did start some of my work in life working on technology projects when I worked in the civil service. So I defected from tech into HR. But about 10 years ago, I was fascinated and discovered things like self-managed organizations, which led me to look at Agile and Scrum. And so part of the work I do is helping HR and OD teams affect change by using agile techniques. Thank you.
Thanks, Barry.
I'll go next. So yeah, my name's Vikram Jain. I'm the Managing Director of JCURV. And for those who don't know, JCURV's kind of mission in life is to help increase organizational agility so they can thrive in this mad world we live in.
Thanks, Vikram.
Hi, I'm Shelly Moulton. So I'm Customer Services Operations and Digital Director at Vodafone. Prior to that, I was Managing Director for Service at Experian, and prior to that, Chief Operations and Technology Officer for Barclaycard Europe. So I bring to the table, I guess, a focus on some of the practicalities of leading teams and operational teams having to work in more agile and effective ways.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Shelley. So please leverage our amazing panelists this afternoon and get your questions in. So hopefully you've all had a chance to look at the report and take in some of the insights or the many insights. If you haven't, I know Ben is going to share the link in the chat functionality. So please download it and take a read after this. But Vikram, perhaps if I could just start with yourself, what instigated the commissioning of this report by the Agile Business Consortium, Truthsayers and JCURV? Why deep dive into agile culture, and how do you think it will actually help organizations?
Okay, so I guess why have we done this piece of research then is that I'm sure everyone around the table here would appreciate that everywhere it seems that the biggest challenge or the biggest impediment for sustaining or scaling agile ways of working always seems to be voted as culture and behaviors. And if you, not only through our experience, I'm sure you've experienced the same thing. If you look at the version 1 report year on year, it says the same thing as well, that these things come at the top of the chart really. So that's really why we thought, well, let's look into that. And there's a lot of investment and effort going into kind of training on the methodology and the process, but probably not as much going into kind of the cultures and behaviors side as well. So that's why we've done this. And I guess, well, hopefully, how is it going to be useful? Well, I guess this research, as you can see, starts to look at, we can be able to then look at how does agile culture vary based on different methodologies being used, different regions, different countries, different sectors as well. So this gives hopefully an opportunity for people to benchmark what's working and what's not working, and give an opportunity to understand what levers you could pull to strengthen the culture and the behaviours in your particular organisation.
Thank you, and really insightful read. You've used neuroscience capability or technology to kind of help in the surveying technique. How's that important in really understanding how people are thinking and feeling?
Yeah, so we thought that, seeing that we were looking into culture and behaviour as the real kind of intangible elements, we thought we'd try and use a much more innovative approach of really understanding the real reasons behind how people were feeling. So we partnered up with Truth Sayers, which has got this really innovative tool, and they use neurotechnology to do that. And I'm sure you can do more research into this, but the tool that Truth Sayers uses is basically much more accurate than a typical tick box survey tool, because it gets to the point of understanding how you really feel, as opposed to how any respondent thinks they should say something on a survey, really. So that's why we've used neuroscience, and it's come up with some really interesting results. Thanks,
Vikram. Nikki, if I can, get a couple of perspectives from yourself. So, based on your experience, why is an agile culture so important?
Well, there's a number of elements to this, I guess, but I think the first one, and perhaps sort of the most, ethically important one, is that in order to really get the best out of an organisation and all the talent that is within it, you really have to give people the opportunity to bring their ideas and their energy. And I think that a lot of organisations still struggle to achieve that. And it's interesting that particularly this year, there's been so much focus on, diversity and inclusion. But if you are able to really improve the diversity of your workforce, you still won't benefit from that unless you can really include everybody's ideas and they're really able to contribute and make change. So I think realising potential is the first one. And I think, they're all sort of interrelated, but the second one really is that the old ways just aren't fit for purpose anymore. And I think that a lot of, thinking back over the sort of 20 odd years that, I've been working, that what I realise now is that we've inherited a lot of the sort of management practices from a completely different era and paradigm, where perhaps it was possible to have the leader of the organisation, sort of stand in the factory and look over the workforce and see what can be improved and have that sort of view of I know best. But that just doesn't exist anymore in this world. So much is changing. We need everybody seeing from different perspectives and contributing. So I think that the fact that we've got so much more uncertainty and change and need for speed, that we need this type of approach. And that's why I think it's kind of grown up out of those kind of organizations that are sort of changing the world. And I think the sort of third part of that is, almost a continuation of that point, which is the problems that we face, I think, as a world and as a sort of species are so big that the only way that we can tackle them is by breaking them down into really small steps that mean that we can make progress and make them feel achievable to people. And I think that's what the sort of agile culture and mindset enables people to do. And that can be at the biggest level with something like climate change or something, much smaller within one organization. But they're really meaningful reasons that actually, if we want to succeed, as a society, then so far, I think this is the best approach that we've come up with.
Yeah, no, really fascinating insights. And hopefully we can use agile ways of working to solve climate change, which will mean we've got a few happy customers in this room. Perry, what's your perspective on that? Why do you think an agile culture is important?
Well, I mean, it's really encouraging that this survey has been based on feel, because obviously the nature of culture in an organisation is, how does it feel to be here? So it's as much a sensation as it is a series of rituals and acts. So I guess what I'm particularly intrigued by, and I've seen it in the report, is how much people have described a sense of energy towards working in an agile approach. Now, I'm fascinated by this concept of how we use the kilojoules that we have as human beings to process the work and activities that we've got. I'm also pleased to see that there are some warning signs that some industries and some sectors are in a state of stasis. They're in a state of kind of being stuck. And so this is a good call to unstick. And so in the kind of consulting work that we do, we use it as a bit of a Trojan horse to get agile into change and organization design. Because what we want to do is create more accountable, more visible and more inclusive ways that people can partake in their work. And agile just gives you that perfect excuse to do it. And the other thing I think is really important is some surveys recently about the state of work that we're now doing in a dispersed sense. People are describing that they never feel like they complete their work. Now, the lovely thing about Agile, not just the stuff that Nikki was talking about with the stages and increments and sprints, is that you feel like you are punctuating a day by doing things and achieving them, because you've created these micro entities, I suppose, of work to be done. So I'm loving the fact we are now saying this is how 21st century work's done, whether it's dispersed or not.
Yeah, thanks, Perry. Phil, you're from the CTO world, but have worked in and out of kind of IT areas as well. But what's your perspective of an agile culture? Is it important?
Oh, massively. I'll just pick out a couple of things I was just sitting there thinking about. First, Perry just talked about increments and punctuating your day. Look, who doesn't want to celebrate? And the ability to actually celebrate and recognise on a regular basis, it just helps, particularly when we're all sitting where we're sitting on Zoom calls instead of seeing people face to face. So I'd pick that out. I'd just pick up on the word that I heard when Nikki's speaking around speed. And I truly believe that working quickly keeps you safe. Learning quickly by incremental changes, it gives you the space to adapt. And if you think another real point of discussion at the moment is cost. Well, you do things in small increments and you learn by increment. You don't burn all your cash in those big, long waterfall projects that we all used to love and take part in. So for me, moving fast keeps you safe, you get your learning, you keep relevant as an organisation and as a person, and you realise your value to all your stakeholders. I think that's a massively important thing. When I think of stakeholders, I think of customers first. So if you can get your items out there incrementally, whatever you're shipping, the customer gets some value as they go along. Your colleagues get involved and they get value as they go along. Your investors get it as well. Their time to value speeds up. And even regulators are starting to see the value of Agile as well. Certainly where I work in financial services, they appreciate the fact that we're able to adapt, move quickly, develop it quickly. So for me, I just can't do without Agile.
Thanks, Phil. Interesting perspective of the regulator actually wanting and keen for this, because, we hear so often that they don't believe that it can work in financial services. Shelley, you've kind of gone across a few different industries over the years, but what's your perspective? What are the key building blocks of building a strong agile culture?
Yeah, so thanks, Pal. I think probably I'd kind of highlight 5 things. I think firstly, I think a really important building block is to recognise that an agile culture and the ways of working need to be different for all of the organisation and not just for some people. It's not a bolt on to your current culture. It can't be I'm in an agile team and actually I don't think about agile over here. And that was really evident when I was in Barclaycard as an example, that one of the real blockers we had to overcome was having agile teams that were set up, but then when something needed to go through supply chain or through legal or through compliance, suddenly all of those benefits of speed and different ways of working were lost. And one of my favorite memories was that the agile teams felt really empowered to raise those issues, and they actually set up a washing line across their agile area and hung items of all of the blockers with pegs onto the washing line to show real visibility. They actually did it on pairs of pants because they said, look, these are the things that are totally pants in our organisation. And they really exposed the fact that actually, they said, right, supply chain, come down and see what we're saying around why you're not working in an agile way. So I think that's the kind of first thing, getting that recognition of the cultural change and getting it out there to everybody. The second, which I think both Phil and Nikki touched on, was one around speed. So really getting that recognition that Agile is about speed and is about getting value to market. It's not about cost reduction. And I think, you know, a number of organisations start off on the wrong path of thinking this is going to take cost out rather than actually saying, no, this is about value to market. So I think making sure you've got your KPIs and measurements aligned with what this will really bring is incredibly important. Thirdly, I would say having proper servant leadership and the right tone from the top around decision making being devolved. You know, I've seen lots of leaders say, no, I'm really bought into Agile. And then they kind of go, well, where's my 50-page PowerPoint steer code deck? And my diary can only fit you in, you know, on the second Thursday in a blue moon. It's kind of, no, that's not the way of working. So really getting the leaders to recognize that they have to change their behavior and they have to attend, you know, the stand-ups at a time that, you know, that suits the team. That real role modeling is absolutely key. And then the fourth point I'd highlight is real willingness to learn and adapt on the road. So, you know, when you're thinking about your budget cycles, how do you move away from having a fixed view of the end state and what's going to happen in 3 years' time and being more iterative and adaptive, and thinking about how you need to re-engineer your planning processes as an organisation. And probably the last one that I would highlight is one around having the right capabilities in place. So how are you going to invest in the right environment, the right coaching and skills? You know, we made a number of investments around having Agile coaches, making sure you've got access to help is critically important. So they're the ones I'd highlight.
Cool, thanks, Shelley. And I think everyone's probably writing the note down of like, let's start hanging up the washing because I think we've all got things to put up on there. Brilliant.
I will see if I can find a photo of the pants for anybody who wants it.
Yeah, we'd love that. So what we're going to do this afternoon is actually be massively agile in how we run this panel discussion. So the report had you know, many insights in it, but it kind of had you know, 6 key highlights. And what we wanted to do was to ensure that we're prioritising the time of this panel conversation for you, our customers, to really focus on the things that are going to add most value to you. So we're going to run a poll where it has the 6 insights on there, and we want you to vote for the topic that you would most like to talk about this afternoon. So Emily, if you don't mind helping us launch that poll. So no pressure to our panelists here of then having to respond to the 6 themes. Just give everyone a couple of minutes to vote. Okay, so the one that came to the top then was a strong agile culture and business performance. So we'll definitely talk about that one. And then we've also got organisations using more sophisticated models have a weaker culture. And then I think we've got a tie for third, which is it takes time and the importance of teams. Perfect. So thank you. Thanks for your votes in steering this panel conversation. So let's start with then, you know, that business performance. Nikki, if I could come to you, but you know, that's a huge percentage of 235%. You know, does that correlate with what you've seen, you know, as you've been working with Agile in your previous roles?
Yeah, I think it does. And thinking back to, you know, some of the comments that were made just a few moments ago, it's because lots of small improvements add up to really big change. And I think that's why you get those, you know, huge step changes in total business performance. And it's not because of one big initiative, it's because new things happen faster and more easily, but lots of existing things are improving. And thinking back to my time at Direct Line Group, there were examples, and you may remember these also, that there were certain blockers that were stopping teams from moving faster and getting better outcomes, particularly in our pricing teams. And these were sort of known issues, and projects had happened over the years to address them, and had, run for months and, really long periods of time, but hadn't had any breakthrough. And then when we took those same issues and really broke them down and really supported the team and worked in a different way, suddenly we started to actually get a shift in both the speed and the value, from those areas. So yeah, I completely can see how those big numbers are achievable, even though they might seem a bit shocking. It's because they're actually lots and lots of small numbers added up together.
Yeah, great to get your perspective. Phil, you've worked in and out of kind of the IT world, but do you think that you get to see the same business benefits in all functions?
Maybe it's naturally some functions and some of the typical behaviours you see in them lend themselves better to it. I think someone earlier, I think Shelley talked about the agile versus non-agile teams. That there's definitely some functions, and without, I'm going to call that more traditional functions. Let's call them legal, compliance, and audit. Generally, that they're harder to adapt to it. They almost see themselves as there, not to stop you doing what you want to do, but they don't always see themselves as enabling. Now, I've seen that shift over the last few years. You do see more and more of those disciplines understanding the need to be part of a cross-functional team. And I think that's where you can actually harness and bring together people with different mindsets and start to almost infect and pollinate some of those people with more stereotypical roles that lend themselves more to tell me what you're going to do, and I'll reflect and tell you whether it's right or wrong and give you my findings. It's too late. They need to be in with you. So I think for me, one of the breakthroughs that I've seen in sort of smashing some of that apart is actually getting those people cross-functional and getting them involved. And I think that's about functions. It also goes upwards as well, where often you see the resistance far more senior level, and often for them you need to show evidence of it working. If they're not quite on side with what you're doing, or don't want to get involved in the agile despite words, evidence works.
Brilliant, thanks Phil. Shelley, if I could come to you, but how's this manifested in some of the teams or organizations that you've been working with and in?
Yeah. So perhaps if I can highlight a couple of examples. One's one around making sure that the agile team feel accountable for delivering those business performance outcomes. And at Barclaycard, what we did in establishing the environment is ask the agile teams to bid to get the space in the agile environment where they had access to the coaches, where they had access to the right facilities to drive their overall squad performance. They had to set a countdown clock. They each had their countdown clock, which counted down in terms of whether they were delivering to their sprint outcomes that they had set. And they earned the right to stay in that environment based on whether they delivered the performance outcomes or otherwise. So it created a real sense of a strong tie between working in that way, working in that culture, working in that environment, and the performance that they delivered. I think it's a slightly different example, and Nikki talked a little bit earlier around how management practices have had to evolve dramatically in this environment. Vodafone, like many organisations, has had to figure out how to forge its way in this uncertain time. And one of the things that I think really enabled us to outperform the rest of our telecoms competitors over the first half of this year has been the really strong agile culture and the speed in which we were able to make business decisions and pivot to a whole new way of working at a time when so many people were dependent upon telecoms and broadband. And we effectively pivoted the whole organisation to totally new operating model and way of working within an 8-day period. And many other organisations were still citing COVID as means of which they couldn't continue to support their customers, even long into the summer, and we were already pivoted and working in that new way by the start of April. So, just over 7 days after lockdown officially started. So I think you can absolutely make that link between how you work and proving that into your top line financial performance.
Great, thanks for that perspective. You know, Perry, Vikram, any comments to add? I guess you're working cross-industry. You know, is the size of these business benefits open to all industry sectors? You know, what are your perspectives?
Shall I go first, Vikram, and then I think you can talk about some of your achievements. Mine are far less impressive, but I shall be using 235% in every conversation I have on.
Especially when it comes to signing up to, you know, targets for next year.
Absolutely right. I'm going to use a Star Wars quote, because the tighter the grip, the more that slips through the fingers, right? That's what I've seen in business. They have created bureaucracy on bureaucracy to protect assets or decision-making or whatever it might be. And I think we have seen the result of that is a flatlined productivity kind of not curve line. And so what I'm really liking about some of the approaches we're talking about here is they are not devoid of quality. These are about assessing quality at key points, so that actually you don't just hope quality happens at the end of a product cycle. You see it in every iteration. You see it in every task completion. You see it in every stand-up and retrospective. So these things are hard baked into the cycles, and that shifts people's behavior. That creates a willingness, I guess, to stand for quality and speed. When people say that, you know, you can do it quickly, but you do it shoddily, it's like, well, you don't have to. If you remove bureaucracy, you are not hemorrhaging people's efforts and decision-making and speed and time. So I think there's definitely something in that. And Deloitte have done some human capital research for the last couple of years, and they say the most effective high-performing teams, organizations, are the ones where people form into networks of teams and solve problems, not they are orchestrated through massive, scaled, cascaded programs. So I think there's something about the nimbleness that we've got here. And I saw it in person when I went to an organization that still uses XP, you know, sort of pair programming. They have such high quality outputs and they do it at such speed. They don't have a customer service help desk because their software never fails. And it's that ethos I want to see operate in different business units. And that's what I try and do with clients. Thanks,
Perry. And what's your perspective, Vikram? You know, what do you think the key parts are that are driving this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just an interesting reflection, right? So what the data said is that even though that some teams are using Agile, the culture was the thing which increased performance by 235%. So that gives almost a business case for going beyond just the methodology. And I think, you know, for all the practitioners out there, you think about the conversations that we have with leadership teams where, you know, as Nikki and the team were just talking about all that bureaucracy that they kind of push onto the teams. This is the business case, which hopefully opens their eyes and says, well, actually, you need to do something different. And, you know, going back to the root cause of what we found from an agile culture perspective, what are the drivers there? You've got empowerment, you've got creating a kind of a disciplined learning approach that we're all learning from each other and, you know, through the various different time boxes, creating that safe and open environment. Those are the things what we're saying, which will make that 235% performance improvement. So I think that's the interesting thing for me, and I think the conversations we're having with, you know, the leadership teams, which are key to this, is to say that you are key to the performance improvements of these teams, and not just pushing it all onto the, you know, why we need to train more people, etc. That's not going to make the bigger difference like that.
Great, good to get your perspective. Just moving the conversation on a little bit. So one of the other insights from the survey was, you know, this statement of, you know, organizations that have got more sophisticated agile methodologies in place have actually got a weaker culture, which is almost counterintuitive. You know, Vikram, maybe you can just help explain that. What does that mean?
Yeah, so just on that point, so when we did the survey, we asked people whether they're using just simple Scrum, or whether they're using kind of all the way up through to kind of DevOps approaches, and whether they're going really super sophisticated in terms of applying that agile approach across full value streams. And we've seen organizations, I'm sure you've all seen it, organizations on various different states of maturity. And that's what we found, is that the more sophisticated, the more scaled they are at using these approaches, the score around agile maturity in terms of culture goes down. That was the big finding there. So, and we're seeing this a lot now. If you look at the big banks and where they're going, they're using value stream approach, aligning their whole organizations around the customer journey. Absolutely fantastic. And to to kind of Shelley's point, they're being sold on doing that through cost reduction programs, right? If we do that approach, use an agile model, you'll get a 20% saving. But the kind of the warning sign on all of that is that you'll actually, in connecting back to that agile culture equals greater performance, it's actually having a counterintuitive impact. And I guess my takeaway from this is that you've got to lead with culture in terms of lead with strengthening culture and behaviors, as opposed to leading with a restructuring your organization into kind of agile operating models.
Can I just dip in on that, please? So, yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. And I think that Shelley mentioned something earlier as well, which is that the role modeling element of leaders is so important. And I think they really have to change their behaviors first to really show people that this is authentic and it's real. And if we put forward our ideas, or if we act as though we have ownership, then it is real. And I think perhaps the sort of trip up with the sort of the dependence, let's say, of leaders on the methodology and focusing on that is, in a way, still a mindset of it's the team that will do it, rather than it's us as a leadership team that are going to make this happen. And so it's almost using the structure and the methodology as a bit of a crutch, rather than leading truly with behaviors and culture.
And Nikki, maybe if I just get you to expand a little bit, but I know you went down a pilot phase when you experimented with Agile, and you kind of scaled that out. What were the key components to make sure you dialed up to ensure that when you scaled it succeeded?
Well, there were a few things. I think that one was helping people to understand why, and fitting it into the bigger picture of the change that we needed to make, but then also supporting people as well. So I think Shelley also mentioned earlier about making sure that training was available so that people understood different roles and new practices and ways of working. But I also think there's something about kind of setting the team sort of in that direction, or saying this is the intent, this is where we need to go, but then there is a part of this which is sort of handing that off to the team then to take forward. So they have to own it, they have to take it on board and make it fit that the team and make it work for them. So I think those are all important aspects.
Yeah,
thanks. And that kind of fits in with one of the insights, doesn't it, on that it's not about it's about the team, and a greater focus on that. Vikram, were you going to say something?
Well, I was just reading what Julian was saying, and also talking about the fact that it's all about working with the leader's intent. And I think there's another comment around the fact that people are talking about the fact that how come leaders don't get it, and you have to. I know that a lot of the kind of the delivery teams really want this approach, and we've seen it in the research, right? The delivery teams love this approach, and it's just, I guess, one of the challenges we've identified is that almost taking the leaders with us and getting them to really get it, as opposed to just pushing it on them, is important, right? I'll be interested, Shelley, what you did at Barclays. How did you get the leaders kind of getting to that point where they actually owned this, rather than just being told that they have to do it and say the right things?
So I think the key thing that we did was we arranged leaders' days, so whereby we brought them down into the collab, which was the space that we had, and got them really to be very visible on the floor, engaging with the teams, doing collab in the collab. So actually leaders talks, getting them along to some of the external speakers we had. So really getting them to touch and feel the environment was critical, as well as obviously walking them past our washing line of pants and saying, well, actually, can you please take a set of pants along the way in terms of one of our blockers, and we'll put your name up on the washing line as somebody who's going to solve it. So I think really making them feel strongly accountable for being part of the solution was absolutely critical, because it's too easy for people to talk at a distance and say all the right things. It's quite different, when they're forced into a scenario to say, no, actually, you've got to really demonstrate, and I think Nikki used the term, really role model, and be there to be seen and be part of it.
Thanks, Shelley. Phil, I can see you were eager to say something there.
Yeah, no, it's a little bit. I mean, some of the this might this is probably a slightly negative way of looking at it, but some of the behaviour I see, sounds like we're talking about some group of people who don't exist, but these senior leaders that we're talking about, it's the 2 C's, control and certainty. And maybe it's even a third one of comfort that they get from the traditional way of doing things. But actually, it's less about the methodology for me in terms of talking to these people, because the delivery team get it, and most of the cross-functional teams, they're in it and they want it. I think you can change them by just talking about mindset and behaviours, rather than worrying about your ceremonies and how we're going to do it and stuff like that. They still own the strategy. You're not taking the strategy away from these people, and sitting those tables, actually really, that's what they really own, and that's the direction. And seeing the military reference in the chat, we're not taking that away from them. Let go on how.
And the importance of the intent is so key in that, to then help with that direction. Perry, I wanted to kind of ask you a little bit around, if we just move the conversation on a little bit, but one of the findings is that, a good agile culture moves away from I to teams. What's your perspective on that, and what do organizations need to start doing to change the systems and processes to enable that to truly happen? If I think about myself and my career, I've been in banking for 20 years, and it was all about individual bonuses and individual targets. So what does this mean as we go into 2021?
Well, I think it creates a really nice challenge for my profession in HR and OD and reward, really, because we've kind of atomized reward on the individual, and that's encouraged and inculcated some absolutely awful behaviours in some respects, hasn't it? Yet we've already seen some experiment where that's done at a team level, and it's a completely different dynamic. Dan Pink's book, To Sell is Human, talked about exactly that concept. So I think what we're seeing in Agile is that the all for one for all, esprit de corps kind of thing, I think. And I think there's something really interesting about the climate that's created, right? So I think when we've got people working really hard on a sort of lone wolf type of basis, there's this heroism that's referred to by Ben in the report. And it's almost like, well, that's good for you, but that could be a blockage in itself. That could be preventing other people from learning, and the shared enterprise just doesn't come in. So I'm fascinated by self-management, as I said earlier on. Now, if you've got a system where people are devoid of process, then people are often revving really high to try and get work done, and that creates a heat in the machine. If you've got too much process, it creates a mechanistic coldness to it, and people come away from it. It's not. So I'm going to use the metaphor and kind of analogy really of holacracy, which is a system that's been introduced to take away layers of hierarchy and create circles. Now, people paid so much attention to the process, they forget the human connections that are needed in creating that sort of thing. So I'm loving the fact that we are now saying human connections are utterly vital here, and the team is it. It's the collective effort, it's the hive mind, it's the I'm going to help you out just because you're one of my team. Again, using a military analogy, Simon Sinek talks about this. Why do people go into dangerous situations to rescue a comrade? Because they do it for me. It's that kind of thing that's created in agile teams I've seen that I've rarely found in teams before. So, we've got some gilt-edged stuff here to say this is how we can define a team. Very collaborative, very self-managed, none of the rhetoric, and all the soul.
Mm-hmm. I've got just an interesting learning. So we worked with a bank a couple of years ago, and we introduced the basic agile principles. They got going, and I've seen with those guys, rather than just trying to, we had potentially all the toolkit in there saying, right, you need to go and focus on team, not individual. But we kind of introduced everything kind of iteratively, and almost the team started to get that themselves, and that was way more sustainable. Because I've seen some clients of ours say, oh, look at Netflix. Netflix have gone down the principle of like everyone kind of knows everyone's bonuses, and you can't just plonk it on a team which has not got that maturity. And it took about 9 months, but they got to the point, this bank, where they were very, very fixed in their approach, quite bureaucratic, quite governance heavy, and they got to the point where they were saying, we're just going to, everyone will bonus people based on team performance as opposed to individual performance. And they said, like, in terms of holidays, we're not going to bother managing holidays anymore. As long as the team gets the job done, then we'll hold each other to account for just doing that, really. So I think it's one of these things to note that it's iterative rather than just it can't be just a binary approach of introducing these concepts.
Thanks, Vikram. Just I wanted to go to one of the questions that's come up into the chat by Jamie, which is saying, how does someone commit to outcomes over a given time period? You know, whether that be a 5-year strategy or an 8-week project delivery. You know, Shelley, are we living in a world where 5-year strategies are still being worked on?
I don't know whether I don't work in a world where 5-year strategies are being worked on, but I do work in a world where 3-year strategies are being worked on. I mean, I think, and I think Phil made the point rightly, that I think leaders have still got a role to play to set clear direction as to where we are heading. I think in an agile world, you need to be more flexible on how you iterate towards that endpoint direction. But I don't think agile should ever be used as an excuse to have lack of clarity, lack of direction, or things to just be chaotic. But I think we do need to recognise in what is an uncertain world that it's not necessarily a kind of a straight linear line to how you move from A to B.
Yeah, and I'm going to look at my panelists here. Any other perspectives to kind of add to that? What happens if the culture is, you know, that need to have a plan?
I think I'll just chip in a little bit. So look, in our organisation, we still work to a 3-year strategy. In fact, I just finished refreshing a 3-year technology strategy, but it's extremely directional and extremely flexible in its makeup. We're actually in an interesting point in our evolution where we're trying to get our heads around doing longer term product developments that traditionally would take a year to do, and trying to do them in increments. I guess we're approaching that with an agile mindset. We started just in steps. So first of all, we broke down into quarters, because some of those people who still wanted that year of certainty of what's going to come out the end, we broke it into quarters. And we're now just taking that and by quarter planning it. So we give absolute certainty for the next quarter of what you're going to see in your sprints that are coming. And then the certainty reduces as we go out, but we do enough estimation to know that the outcome will still lead to something that matches the direction. We won't necessarily commit to what colour it is or what shape it is, but it will give enough certainty that the people who have commissioned the piece of work feel that there's or they provide the willingness to invest in starting it and get us going into it, and are prepared to put it down in their budgets as well. That's often what they're looking for. That's where we're at. We've still got an annual budget planning, so we have to provide some level of estimation for them to put their budgets through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so yeah, in some certain cases that need is still there. Any other perspectives? I
was just going to add one, which is, I think that what Phil was just talking about is actually a really healthy tension that this can introduce, because I do think the role of the leaders is still to set some goals and be able to have that story to tell other, external stakeholders as to where the business is heading and when it will be getting there. But then you really give that over to the teams to break that down into the steps. But I think that does create quite a nice tension, because then what you've committed to over a period of, say, a year or 3 years is something that the team have to work towards. So it does mean that, they can't, then sort of take it sort of too slow or too easily, because, that tension is there. And I think that's something that is needed to be built in to make it work.
Thanks, Nikki. Well, time is just flying by. I've just looked at the time and...
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah, go on, Barry.
I think we need to bring strategy nearer to people, not that it's some distant thing that people kind of go, I don't really get it, but I'm just doing what I'm doing right now. And I think Agile gives you a perfect excuse to do that in the way Nikki just described. So if the strategy doesn't mean something to you, then there's something not right with that strategy. It needs to come nearer to people so they can take their Agile steps to deliver products, services, solutions, and bake responsiveness into part of what they do.
Yeah, so I want to just open it up to all the panelists actually to then say, from the conversation, from reading the report and all your experiences, what's your kind of key takeaway that you're going to take back to your organisation, kind of having this inflection point at the end of 2020, you know, in a crazy year going into next year. So Shelley, if I start with you on your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing for me that I absolutely take back is the points that are in the report about the culture. I think that's absolutely key. If I reflect on Vodafone in terms of its culture, I still think that there are real drives and really good work in terms of Agile overall. But I think some of the underlying engineering principles in terms of the way that that's used is not as strong as it could be. So that how we strengthen the culture top to bottom to work in a very systematic Agile way is definitely what I'll be taking back.
Thanks, Shelley. Phil?
I think I have certainty we will have uncertainty in the coming year. And I think that's just the now. So on that basis, I'm going to take back, I think, I'm going to worry less about the methodology and care more about the mindset, and that just holding you in good stead for the uncertainty that I think will come.
Thanks, Phil. Nikki?
I think the thing that I will really take out of it is that from the research, people enjoy working this way more. And I think that's why the results come. And ultimately, you know, we all want to enjoy work. It's such a big part of our lives. And if we have fun doing it, yeah, I can see how then that translates into better results. So I don't think that we should forget that this is also about improving the quality of people's lives at work, and it's good for business too.
Yeah, no, I really like that human aspect, because at the end of the day, you know, it's why we've all got the education we have, or, you know, why we come to work, is we want to deliver value and make a difference to, you know, society and the customers that we serve. So yeah, I you know, it's that humbleness and that simplicity that actually this is a methodology that allows that to happen. Vikram, what are your takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, I guess mine's probably more from a consulting angle, but I guess it's if you're embarking on this journey, whether it's starting, whether it's reinvigorating, whether it's recovering, it's lead with behaviours and culture, I think, is the takeaway I got from this. And I think just building on that is then measuring behaviours and culture as you go along, as opposed to just focusing on, you know, I've seen a lot of clients talk about we've trained 70% of our people, we have X number of teams using Agile. It's maybe we should be focusing on measuring the culture and the behaviors of the organizations. And that's actually the best probably indicator of how well this is going to sustain and scale.
And Vikram, if I can just ask a follow-on question, but how do organizations measure culture? It's the, you know, I know, you know, it started to happen within this survey, but, you know, is there a takeaway that people can start to think about to get that baseline now?
Well, naturally, they should go and speak to truthsayers who developed this tool. But I mean, the way we've done that is we've kind of asked the basic questions, you know, focusing on myself in terms of, am I learning? Am I able to, you know, trial and test and experiments? We've looked at kind of from a leadership perspective, saying that, are you empowering your teams? Do you know, how open is the culture? So I think if you have a look at the report, there's probably 7 or 8 questions that anyone can ask, and you can build your own survey. But, you know, I definitely recommend having a look at the Truthsayers tool, which will allow you just to see how healthy things are right now.
Thank you, Vikram. And Perry, what's your takeaway?
+1 to Nikki's, because obviously the people reporting that they enjoy their work more is, you know, that's kind of HR holy grail, right? So I'm absolutely going to endorse that one. But I do want to zoom back into that one about teams being more important than individuals. We've had brilliant jerks for too long, and that's not a good situation. It's toxicity and it's divisive. And I think what we are starting to understand is that collective difference makes the difference, and Agile, I think, inculcates that and encourages that, gives people a chance to learn and flourish, gives people a chance to understand how it is togetherness that matters. And so that is the strong point I'm going to push from this.
Fantastic. Thank you, Perry. And while we've just been sharing our takeaways, we've had a couple of questions come in. So I do want to kind of just ask the panelists these. So, you know, we're increasingly hearing the role of, you know, in a business agility coach, you know, gaining prominence. What's the panel's view on how this role will kind of look over the next few years? Is it here to stay?
I mean, I can answer that. I mean, I think for sure, and I'm not just being biased because we're a management consultant, but I mean, if you think about the organizations are huge, right? And a lot of these organizations are being run by individuals who have been super successful for 30 years plus, right? And to help someone unlearn maybe things which have been worked in the past, but maybe not work right now, I think does take time. And there's a skill to that, which is really, really fundamental, I think. And it's like, you know, if I wanted to lose 5 kilos next year, which by the way, I probably try to actually, but you know, I need someone to help me because I only know what I know. So I think it's a fundamental role really of helping unlearn and relearn new skills, new capabilities in the future.
And if I can just add to that, I think, you know, getting that initial help is so important in the early stage in helping do that learn and unlearn. I think what you also need to do is to complement that with that knowledge and behaviour transfer into your leaders within your organisation, so that you're becoming, you know, adopting a greater level of self-sufficiency within the culture and the behaviours of leaders to keep that evolution going.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Shelley. So I just want to kind of end by saying, you know, do any of the panelists kind of have a nugget of advice, you know, for anyone, you know, to everyone that's listening today? Is there something, if everyone could just take a takeaway, you'd say, think about that in 2021? You know, there's a huge focus on, you know, taking up this behaviour, setting up a washing line.
Yeah, I think, Pal, I'll happily start. I think the key thing for me is once you make the shift, people don't want to go back. And I think that was relevant both in terms of the shift to an agile culture in Barclaycard, where at first people were thinking they were giving something up, they were giving up their fixed desk, they were giving up their traditional role, and there was a level of resistance. And then once people embraced that, actually they didn't want to go back. And I think that's the same in terms of aspects of this new way of working. You know, do we want to stay in lockdown forever? Certainly not. But do I think that people who've traditionally been in the office 5 days a week will go back to being in the office 5 days a week? Certainly not. So I think you absolutely have to take the best, embrace and focus on how you move forward and not kind of look to regress back.
Yeah, no, great points. And actually the power of, you know, doing a big 2020 retrospective on, you know, some of the positives of this year is something I think all of us should be doing. Anyone else? I'm just looking at my panelists here. Vikram?
I just wanted to build on Nikki's point, which I love, you know, is I think we had it in the report. It says you can have it all, like happier teams doing kind of like great work. You know, I think isn't that all what we want in life? You know, I know we come to work, whether it's just in our next door office or whatever, but I mean, everyone wants to just do a great job, enjoy what they're doing. You know, and maybe I don't want to sound it too happy clappy, but I mean, the agile approach and agile culture definitely moves us a massive step forward.
Thank you. And Phil?
Yeah, I'll just quick, if I just think back, not just about my organisation, but just generally about resilience and adaptability through 2020. You know, you continue to be amazed and humbled by the way that people have moved. You think all organisations pretty much are working from home. That all those workforces that were sitting in, you know, I sit typically in a 5,500 person building. I go there now. There's less than 100 people right now. But, you know, we've completely distributed our working life. You know, if you just think how much we've changed in such a short period of time, and a lot of that was about having a quite singular and common purpose. So, you know, if you can get your team to focus on something, see what you can do when you look back, and take that forward.
Yeah, great piece of advice there, Phil. So, you know, it's amazing how time has flown this afternoon, but I think when I've listened to, you know, all of your comments, you know, a couple of things stand out for me. The first is, you know, it's essential organizations really invest in building, you know, what we're calling agile culture, and you know, it pays back. And like Vikram said, you can have it all. But I think, Nikki, Shelley, you've mentioned it, it does start from the top, and getting leaders to buy into that servant leadership way of working and providing that intent is so key. And then, Phil, you've just touched on it, in that not only does it help in terms of business performance, but it builds business resilience. And if you think about some of the headwinds, across the globe, all organizations are dealing with the impact of COVID, the economy in Europe, thinking about the impacts of Brexit. 2021 is going to continue to be, a year of huge change. And actually, this is a way that we can navigate and pivot and kind of react to what customer needs and how they're changing, in what they want. So, so important. We just want to kind of run a quick poll on, how this session has been, and it's always great to get feedback from your customers as to whether our agile approach works. So while that's just coming up on screen now, this is the first of a series of conversations around, how to build an agile culture. We've all identified it's hugely important, and in the new year we want to deep dive into a couple of themes around Brexit, thinking about the public sector, which, again, one of the findings from the report was that they're a bit weaker versus someone like financial services that have come out stronger. So we're going to continue the conversation, but with a number of deep dives. So, we're looking forward to, continuing to get your insights and thoughts into that. So yeah, thank you for everyone that's voted. And then, just a huge thank you to you joining this session this afternoon, but also to our panelists. And I know many of you have actually filled out the survey yourself. So again, this is our data collectively together. So thank you so much for the insights. So hopefully we'll see you in the new year. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Pyle, for managing us.
Very organised.